All right, you guys, welcome back to the Outdoor RX YouTube channel. In today's video, we've got a lot to unpack as usual. But before we dive into it, I want to invite you guys to please like and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't watched my video from earlier this week, make sure to go back and watch that so you have a little bit more context as to what I'm talking about in today's video. So, with that being said, let's dive into today's video. All right, you guys, so the video I posted earlier this week, I was discussing an angler that got into some trouble with bass last weekend after the Pasquotank River tournament, and I said that I was told or had heard that he was getting set out for the first day at Lake Hartwell. Turns out that did not happen. After all the anglers kind of got into it and made a big to-do about it, I think that they adjusted his punishment, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But it in fact did happen, so that I just want to make very, very clear that Bass is just not making anything public. So, with that being said, let's dive into what that does for the elite anglers and the bass fishing community as a whole. So that creates a massive amount of resentment and, like in my last video, silencing all the anglers. You cannot have an organization that has that much fighting, that much mistrust. It's going to create a massive amount of resentment within the organization and the anglers as a whole, and that is not a good thing. So I did a little bit of digging, and most people know that the Anderson Media Corporation got to be the high stakeholder in Bass in 2017, meaning they control Bass officially as of October 3rd, 2017. So you have Chase Anderson as the CEO, and I read an article on Bassmaster on their website, and I think I found what could possibly be the problem. Now, don't quote me because I'm not a business guy. I don't have experience. I didn't go to school for business, and I know that a lot of times these bigger companies will come in and buy up smaller companies like Bass, and then they'll try to put their little bullshit spin on it, and it goes downhill from there. So I'm going to dive into what I found out and what I think could possibly be the problem here, or should I say who is the problem here. So I'm going to read you guys a few things here. So I already told you that the Anderson Media Corporation basically bought Bass in 2017. Prior to that, they were small-time investors into Bass, but October 3rd, 2017, they did buy it. So I want to talk about who's actually running the show, because Chase Anderson doesn't seem to be actually running the show. So the name Philip Johnson came up. So it says on Bass's website that he was the new EVP of Sales and Business Development as of 2023. Other things that I've seen is that he's the CFO. Not really sure, but what I do know is that he is in charge of absolutely everything, and he's the one ruling with the iron fist. So I'm gonna read y'all his past work experience, and I'm not saying that he's not qualified, but when you're talking about a fishing organization, it's a little bit different than running a Walmart or whatever other things he's done. So he spent 15 years with Anderson Merchandisers. Johnson rose through the ranks as Field Execution Director, Senior Program Manager, and Divisional Director. Most recently, he served as the Vice President, I'm assuming for Anderson Media Corporation, and he was the Walmart Account Executive. Okay, that doesn't really pertain to bass fishing whatsoever, but in addition to sales and business development, Johnson will also oversee marketing, licensing, events, communications, and membership. Okay, so that sounds to me like he's running the show. If you're telling me that one guy is in charge of marketing, we all know what marketing is, licensing, events, communications and membership are the ones that I mainly want to talk about. So when you're talking about communications, in my mind, I'm thinking, the other people that are investors in Bass as an organization, the sponsorships that they don't all list clearly. So it sounds like there's a lot of shady things going on, and this Philip Johnson guy seems to be running the entire deal. So maybe he's the guy that's silencing all the anglers and not allowing all this stuff to come out to the public. And I think that also under that communication stamp is a conservation tab. There should be a huge pull for conservation, and you don't hear a single word about it, which is, like I've said in some of my previous videos, one of the pillars of bass fishing. So I really want to start a conversation with you guys, because as I was digging into this last night, I just couldn't stop going. And then I started doing all these other, doing as many searches as I possibly could on this Anderson Media Corporation and this Philip Johnson guy. This guy seems to be the problem, possibly. So I want y'all to drop some comments. Let's start a conversation below, and let's see if we can't get to the bottom of why the anglers are being silenced, why they have gag orders on them. It's weird. There's a lot of shady things going on, and I've talked about the gray area in some of my past videos, and I think this is the ultimate gray area. So, you guys, please, let's start a conversation up. I will do another follow-up video on this once we get the conversation rolling and I get some good feedback from you guys as to what could be the reason here. Because, another thing I want to talk about is the memberships. So that falls under this Philip Johnson guy's jurisdiction. And as far as I'm concerned, the Bass memberships are dropping at an alarming rate. So it seems to me he's not doing a very good job, and maybe needs to tweak his ruling of the iron fist, as we'll call it. So please drop some comments down below, you guys. And to end this video, I want to share a story with you guys. I was just like, I love sharing stories at the end of these videos, just for you guys to learn, and also it's pretty entertaining. So I want to go back to 2018, my first Bassmaster Open I ever fished as a co-angler on Logan Martin in Alabama. So I roomed with an elite angler, and I also practiced with him. I won't mention his name because he is still fishing on the Elite Series. But we practiced, and then we went to this local's house that he knew or had gotten in contact with, and they were sharing information. And I remember vividly that this angler was taking pictures of the guy's graph and getting, which is perfectly legal in the opens, so it is what it is. But he was getting waypoints, and one of the waypoints, the gentleman that he was getting the information from told him about these like railroad tracks that were under the water in the back of this creek. And the railroad tracks, I'm just saying the railroad tracks because that's what they looked like on side scan. So he said that they started at the mouth of the creek, maybe a little bit in, and they zigzagged through basically the middle of the creek and went all the way to the back. And when you get to the back of the creek, you can see where the actual railroad ties come up onto the bank. So he was like, you should really check this out. And the guy I was with was like, all right, 10-4. So the next day we went out and we checked all the stuff that guy had given him, and this railroad track under the water was one of those. And I remember going over it with side scan, and the guy that I was with was like, it's not going to be worth fishing. We're not even going to touch it, because I guess he didn't see any fish on side scan or whatever it was. But we ended up not fishing that. So let's fast forward to the second day of the Open. I'm a co-angler, and I draw Bill Wadler, which he was on the Elite Series, and I think he won like Lake Erie or something right when LiveScope came out. But anyway, so I drew him, and we start off the day swim jigging, which I was totally green back then. I didn't know what I was doing, but that was pretty cool. And then we went to this exact spot that the guy had given the elite angler that I was rooming with, and he said, no, we're not going to fish it. Bill Wadler went right to this creek, and he was like, all right, so this is going to be a great deal for you as a co-angler. So he put the screen, one of the screens at the console, on side scan. He was like, look, if you can no longer see these railroad tracks, tell me, and we'll both kind of figure out where they are. So Bill he'd basically his whole tournament, besides the mornings, he was fishing these railroad tracks that the guy that I was with said weren't any good. So Bill was throwing a square bill and just banging it off, because the max depth in this little creek was probably like, I don't know, it started off at the mouth at like 8-9 feet, and then most of it was in that 5 foot or below range. So he was just throwing a square bill, and just banging it off of this thing. And he was smashing the largemouth. And if you know, in Logan Martin, it's a lot of spotted bass, but they do have largemouths. And if you can get on the largemouth bite, you're more than likely going to do well in the tournament. So Bill was smashing the fish, so I'm sitting there scrambling in my tackle box, and I just so happened to have a bunch of square bills in there, and I had the exact square bill that he was using, which turned out, I'll just tell y'all, Bill did good in the tournament, and he lost 2 fish that were easily over 5 pounds. And I was sitting in 12th going into that day, and I had 2 fish. And then we got to these railroad tracks, and I tried to boat flip like a 4-pounder with a square bill crankbait with stock hooks. If that tells you how green I was, it was ridiculous. But it was the performance of me has nothing to do with the story. It's just unbelievable how 2 elite anglers can process information completely differently, even though they were given the same information. And it turns out that that place was loaded with fish. So y'all drop some comments down below on what you think about that story, and if you know where those railroad tracks are on Logan Martin Lake in Alabama. So let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.